So on today's episode of How Fucked Up is Fucked Up. So this is a very cold start, a little over 1,000 RPM. Normally my oil pressure on my car, let me shade this a little bit so you can see it better. Normally the oil pressure on my car at this point when I started is above the middle hash mark, or what can be interpreted as the middle hash mark, that guy right there. Normally it rides over that for about the first few minutes of running until it warms up, and then where the gauge is now is normally what my warm oil pressure is at idle. So you can obviously assess from this that it's running low. Now the misconception, well, it's not really a misconception, I think the misinterpretation is that these gauges are not accurate at all. Okay, so while that is true, while you're not getting an actual pressure number, you do understand through past driving experiences where your oil pressure gauge ought to be if the oil pressure is normal. Like I was just able to tell you where my gauge normally rests on a cold start. As you can hear, I don't have any rod rattle or any rod knock or anything like that. My oil pressure light is not on. That kicks on at around 10 to 12 PSI. But what I can tell you is my oil pressure is unusually low and something's definitely wrong. So I'm gonna get into this. We're gonna see if we can figure out exactly why my oil pressure is low. I don't think it's the gauge. The gauge hasn't lied to me. I don't think it's a pressure sender. I think that there's actually physically a problem going on with the oil pump and or the oil pressure relief gear or spring or valve. Maybe there's a problem there. But I'm gonna get into it. We're gonna figure out exactly what's going on. We're gonna see if we can get down to the bottom of this low oil pressure issue, because it happened randomly and all of a sudden. That day at around 3,000 RPM, my oil pressure gauge was roughly, 2/3 of the way up the gauge, and then all of a sudden it dropped to right at halfway, and then out of nowhere I started at 3 hours later, and then I've got oil pressure that's where you see it on the gauge now. As it's dropping, it's actually lower than it was when I first started the video, because the oil's warming up and so is the car, right? You got a little temperature here, oil gets thinner, starts dropping off the pressure there. So basically what we're going to get down to the bottom of is I think that my oil pump may have developed a hairline fracture in the displacer ring and the vernier drive ring that creates oil pressure for the motor. And if that's the case, well, obviously you're going to have some leaking by, which is not going to be pressurizing the motor as it should. So we're going to find out. I'm going to get into it right quick and show you what I got today. Come over here past my buddy's toy. I've got some work to do on that. I may or may not make a video on it, but it's a beautiful specimen. This is a 1998 model Lotus Esprit V8 twin turbo. I've been the only person to take care of this car, work on it for him while he's had it in his possession. So I've got a few maintenance items that I've got to go over on it. I might make a video on it. I think it'd be a pretty cool video, but we'll move on. I don't post up videos very often, and it's probably because I've got a job and a life. So I'm not looking to make money on YouTube. I just do this for the hell of it. Today's venture, of course, I've got some factory replacement bearings, if you will. I'm not going to run this thing on low oil pressure and then go through the whole rigmarole of taking the thing apart only to find out that I've got bearings that are shot and I got to take it apart again. If you're gonna question the oil pressure, then it's time to just move on. You know what I mean? Just put bearings in it, be safe, don't be lazy. We've got some Loctite for the back of the pump. Where's my exhaust gaskets and stuff for the exhaust system. As I had this spare set. This is actually the factory Mitsubishi OE, just the factory manufacturer that does them for Mitsubishi. These are the ones that are micro grooved to Mitsubishi specifications. So I've got actually two sets of bearings. It's not a bad idea to keep a spare set. but you get the gist. Let's see, more exhaust gaskets, little oil pump gasket, oil filter, right? Gotta keep it real. And let me see here. All right, I mean, you'd be lying if I told you I hadn't been busy. I'm going to be doing the rod bearings here shortly. I've got the oil pump out. You can see everything's tore down and disassembled. So originally, what I was expecting to find was the displacer for the oil pump to be cracked or damaged in some way. So far, that is yet to be the case. I don't see any like cracks or damage or anything, but I do see a pretty significant amount of wear here. Fair amount of wear there, and as you can see, you can kind of feel your nail in it. Took several measurements. These are roughly 1/100th of a millimeter smaller than these gears here. So I'm questioning whether or not that's going to make much of a difference, if at all. I've also noticed here that my original gasket for my pickup tube wasn't in the necessarily best of shape, so I put a new gasket on it. Of course, that's a common sense thing, but the condition that the gasket was in wasn't the best. That may have been the cause of my oil pressure drop, and so we're going to find out. I hope like hell it was. That way I don't have to think about it. Still got to do the cleanup on this, put a new gasket here, and I've also got to clean up my housing here. This little bit of wear that you see here, you can't really even feel that in your nail, so it's probably enough that it'll survive. It's not like horribly damaged. Also wondering if any of the gasket sealer here may have been a cause of that, because if it leaks, it's only going to leak here and then back into the oil pan, right? All of this sits in the oil pan, so it could have been possibly leaking by itself on this housing here as well, causing that drop in pressure. Have yet to find out, but I've got to clean all of this up naturally, install my billet gears, reseal this up, put blue Loctite on the screws, and to do that gasket, and then put everything back together, and then start the process of doing the rod bearings and then reassembly. So we'll see what happens. The only thing that I can really think is that since I didn't have a broken gear set, which, I mean, lucky me, I think this being a little of insurance and resealing this guy and the resealing the pickup tube, I think maybe taking care of the problem. Hopefully I'll get it together and then everything goes back to normal, and then it'll be one of those deals where it's like, yeah, well, don't just look for a broken gear set in your oil pump drive. Also make sure that all these other things are addressed as well. I'm gonna also take out the oil pressure relief valve, make sure that it's not collapsed and just allowing some kind of recirc or just a bypass. We're going to go ahead and yank that out and then take a look at that here in a little bit as well. So stay with us. Okay, so here's the plunger for the oil pressure relief valve. The oil pressure relief valve is, you can see some wear marks in it. It's kind of, worn a little bit, but one thing that I noticed that was pretty significant is this little shoulder here that seeps into the very end down here of the channel that it sits in for the relief pressure to be pushed, down on the piston and on the spring assembly. It had a little bit of gum kind of substance on it that may have caused it to hang open a little bit. So I won't know if that makes a difference or not. Again, the wear is, kind of expected, and I don't know if I'll be able to get a replacement for this. This isn't hard to do. It's just more of a, you got to take the damn oil pan off to get to it because they left it inside of the oil pan instead of outside of the oil pan. Those vertical striations or marks, or what you see here, scores, are actually from just the removal of it and the installation of it after cleaning it and kind of testing it, see how smooth it runs in the bore. It runs very smooth in the bore now. I think that's probably from when I was first trying to get the thing out and it just wasn't moving very easily in the bore. So that might be it. This might be what the whole issue was. And it's going to be a multitude of things that could have caused it, but I think this might be the oil pressure relief valve might be the most logical explanation, since my gears aren't cracked, as to what was causing my oil pressure to creep lower and lower and lower. If you look at the bolt that kind of holds in on the inside, you can kind of get a better idea of what it was looked like before I cleaned that guy off. You can see how it's kind of, looks kind of varnished or whatnot. I'm still going to clean this off. I haven't gotten a chance to do that yet. I'm going to go ahead and focus my attention to that, put this back together, put the new gears in it, and then I'll start the reassembly process, because, man, when I tell you I had to take a lot of stuff off, like, it wasn't a little job. And I don't even think, I kind of started on it last minute yesterday. Kind of moved into this morning, kind of taking my sweet little time with it, because I'm looking for problems at every turn. Everything's been kind of expected, so I'm going to start the reassembly process here, and hopefully I'll have this thing back on the road. It probably won't be today, but it may be tomorrow or so. If I get a chance after work to put some time in on it, maybe tomorrow or Tuesday, I'll have it back up and running. I can start driving it again. I missed this thing, man. I can take this car apart 100 times. It doesn't change the way I feel about it. These cars are just great. They're awesome. Mine was beat, so I also have the understanding that mine's going to give me more problems than what a typical 3000 GT VR-4 would give its owners if it was well cared for. So don't base my car, don't use it as the basis of what your experience would be with a 3000 GT. If you find one that's well cared for, you're never going to run into any of this, right? Like, you might run into a problem here or a problem there, but you won't run into the stuff that I've done. Chances are it'll never pop up within the first 3 or 4 years that you have the car. And it's just because my car, dude, it's run a pretty rough life, and I'm just trying to get it back to where it deserves to be. So little backside info on the processes here. I won't give up on this thing. I refuse to give up on this thing. That's how much I love 3000 GT. So we're gonna see how this is gonna work out. I'm gonna go ahead and start the assembly process, get things running, and y'all will see me when this thing's back together. We'll take a quick look at that oil pressure gauge and see how it behaves once everything goes back together.